They drenched her in Coke and laughed, until her husband walked in and fired everyone. When a corporate team humiliated a young analyst by dumping soda on her as a joke, they had no idea who she really was. What happened next shook the entire company and rewrote the rules forever. Who knew a cup of coffee could cost a woman her dignity? Nina Thompson sure didn't. But standing there at that chilly water cooler in the corner of Apex Marketing's 42nd floor office, cradling her coffee in one hand and a pristine, carefully printed presentation in the other, she was about to find out just how cruel, how disgustingly casual, corporate cruelty could be. She wasn't just any employee. Nina was the first and only black female analyst in the entire building, not brought in as some token gesture, but because she earned it. With work, late nights, and results that had pulled their stagnant numbers out of quicksand. That report she held, it had 6 months of her life tucked between those charts and graphs. Every formula in Excel she'd built line by line like a woman walking barefoot over broken glass. Slow, painful, deliberate. It was a Friday. Half the so-called executives had already bolted to their Hampton getaways, trading deadlines for martinis. Those left behind were the ones who kept the lights on. Assistants, clerks, underpaid overworkers, and of course, Jessica Whitmore, Nina's manager. Jessica, a Gucci-wrapped iceberg in heels, blonde ambition with a taste for mockery, and an ego big enough to need its own elevator. She watched Nina like a hawk in lipstick, and next to her were her two favorite accessories. Brad, Apex's resident frat boy in a $2,000 suit who recorded every moment like he was auditioning for a reality show, and Samantha, the HR rep whose idea of conflict resolution was to smile and pretend she didn't hear anything. Nina, calm and poised, returned to her desk. Her mind was already rehearsing the presentation. Data, insights, rollout plans. Nothing fancy, just facts that would shake the boardroom awake. But as she sat, she felt it, that heat on the back of her neck. Jessica was approaching, slow and theatrical, like she was stepping onto a Broadway stage. "Big day today, Thompson," Jessica sneered, her voice coated in sugar and venom. "You ready to wow the big boys? Or still hiding behind your little spreadsheets in your, what was it, some diploma from a state school?" Nina didn't flinch. She never did. Her silence was her armor. Her power came from the work, the kind no one could steal or discredit, even when they tried. But today, that silence, they mistook it for submission. Jessica stepped closer. Too close. "You know what's missing from your equation?" she whispered, then pulled a can of Coca-Cola from under her desk like it was a punchline. A little refreshment, and with a flick of her wrist, she poured the whole thing over Nina's head. That cold, sticky waterfall hit with a hiss. It soaked Nina's natural curls, rolled down her face, splashed across her crisp white blouse, and bled into her papers. Pages she'd agonized over. Ruined. The aluminum can clinked against the desk like a final insult. And then, the laughter. Not the kind that says we're joking. No, this was vicious. That ugly, full-throated sound of people enjoying someone else's humiliation. Brad cackled while recording the whole thing. Samantha giggled, pulling out her phone to post it with a hashtag she thought was clever. Number quota queen. "Oh, honey," Jessica said with a theatrical gasp. "You looked overheated. Just helping you cool off." Brad, still recording, chimed in. "Look at this. Our diversity initiative just got her spa treatment. Coca-Cola shower, diversity edition." And that's the part no one wants to talk about. That 21st century racism doesn't always wear hoods or scream slurs. Sometimes it smiles at you with white teeth, quotes HR policy, and calls itself a joke. Nina didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't even move. She stood there, drenched, sticky, humiliated, frozen not from the cold, but from the pure, boiling rage climbing up her spine. She looked down at her soaked blouse, the very one she had planned to wear for a meeting with investors in an hour. The papers? Destroyed, but the vision? Still sharp as ever. Jessica, arms folded, leaned closer with that smug grin of someone who thinks they've just put the final nail in your professional coffin. "Gonna complain to HR?" she mocked. "Oh, wait. Samantha's standing right here." And she laughed, too. Samantha looked away. That's when Nina, still dripping, reached into her pocket. Calm, steady. She pulled out her phone, opened one private message thread, labeled STL, priority, and typed 5 words. Code red. Time, now. Sent, delivered. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked up, not at Jessica, but through her. "You just made the best mistake of your life," Nina said, with a calm so sharp it could slice marble. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Nina looked at the clock. Kale 10 mani 14 நிமிடம். 15 minutes, she said under her breath. Not to them, to herself. Because in 15 minutes, everything would change. But they didn't know that, not yet. Brad turned his camera back toward Nina's face like he was documenting some final humiliation. Nina sat down, her blouse clinging to her skin, and began carefully peeling the soggy pages apart. Someone in the back whispered, "Poor girl," another muttered. "She doesn't belong here." And most, they just looked the other way. Because that's easier, right? Pretend it didn't happen. Pretend the joke wasn't that bad. They didn't know who Nina Thompson was, and they definitely didn't know who she was married to. She smoothed the curls away from her face, straightened what was left of her presentation, and whispered to herself, "They wanted a show. Well now, they're front row." Kale 10:39. The elevator on the 42nd floor of Apex Marketing, the one with gold trim and card access reserved only for the board of directors, shuddered quietly and began to rise. Its panel flickered a cold electric blue. Those who'd worked in this office longer than a quarter knew what that meant. If that elevator was moving mid-morning on a Friday, someone important, real important, was about to step into the building. "Someone late for the quarterly review?" a junior accountant whispered, barely loud enough for the woman beside him to hear. "Board's in Paris," Samantha murmured back, her voice suddenly tight in her throat. The same Samantha who, 20 minutes earlier, was posting hashtags over a black woman's humiliation. Now her voice lacked the smug assurance she'd wielded like a blade. The elevator stopped. The chime rang, not loud but sharp, final and cold as judgment. The office, all keyboards, gossip, and idle coffee chatter just seconds ago, went still. Dead still. The doors opened. First came 3 men in suits, so sharply tailored they seemed like they'd been born in them. Armani, stone-faced, eyes like IRS audits. Security detail. Not the kind who say, "Sir," the kind who say, "Move." Every one of them exuded that quiet intensity that makes grown men step aside instinctively. And then, him, Alexander Sterling. That name didn't need a title. No Mr., no Sir, just Sterling. Forbes had printed his name a dozen times without ever needing to explain who he was. Founder and CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a man whose net worth danced around $7.8 billion, depending on the hour, depending on the market, and owner, and not stakeholder, not partner, but owner of 80% of Apex Marketing, a detail everyone in the building liked to ignore until right this second. He was tall, the kind of tall that makes people adjust their posture around him without realizing why. His suit was the color of gunmetal, not flashy, not loud, but precise, like every stitch had been measured with intent. The watch on his wrist wasn't about style. It was status, control, permanence. And he didn't speak loudly. He didn't have to. "Nina," he said, his voice like cold iron dragged over silk. "Are you all right?" She turned to face him, still soaked. Her curls clung to her face. Her blouse, once crisp and white, was now streaked with a syrupy residue of soda. And yet, she stood like royalty. Like the coke dripping from her chin was armor, not shame. Jessica Whitmore blinked hard. For a second, the mask cracked. Her lips parted, but her voice hesitated, cracked like porcelain. Who are you?" she stammered. Alexander didn't smile. "Alexander Sterling, owner of this office, and, more to your concern, husband of the woman you decided to humiliate for fun." That silence, it hit harder than any raised voice could. The kind of silence that makes coffee cups stop halfway to lips. The kind of silence that weighs on the floor like judgment made physical. Someone audibly gasped. A spoon clinked uselessly against porcelain. "Security," he said, turning slightly. "No need for fury, just finality. Remove these 3 permanently, no severance, no delays." Brad, still clutching his phone, scrambled. "Wait, it was just a joke. She didn't even say it bothered her." "Yeah," Samantha echoed weakly. Her hands now trembled. "She didn't complain. She just stood there." Alexander stepped forward. Not quickly, not with anger, just with weight, like every step reminded them whose ground they were standing on. He looked at them the way hurricanes look at coastlines. "You assaulted my wife," he said, each syllable deliberate. "You filmed it, mocked her education, her skin, her dignity, and now you're asking why she didn't file a report? You expect the people you step on to send you invitations to stop? Really?" He turned his gaze on Jessica, not shouting, just letting her drown in it. You had 15 minutes to show remorse. You chose laughter. So now you live with consequences. That's how adults operate. Welcome to adulthood. Brad tried to push forward, his mouth forming more excuses. But one of the suited guards stepped between them with all the subtlety of a moving truck. The phone slipped from Brad's hand, clattered to the ground and blinked out. The live feed? Gone. Status? Offline. Jessica didn't move. Not because she was calm, but because her knees weren't sure what to do. Nina, still composed despite her damp clothes, calmly wiped her cheek with a tissue. Then, without ceremony, she reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive, placing it gently on the closest desk. "These are the analytics for Q3, she said, her voice clear, even. "The data that drove a 47% revenue spike this quarter. The same data they tried to claim as theirs." Jessica's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands, previously adorned with power-posing confidence, now gripped the edge of the desk like it might hold her up. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" Jessica finally whispered. Nina looked her dead in the eye. "Because I needed to see how far you'd go. Now I know. Thanks for making it so easy to prove." And just like that, the trio was gone, escorted silently out, not even given time to pack. No explanations, no goodbyes, just erased. 11:15 a.m. conference room. Nina sat at the head of the table now. Her blouse was still wet, and yet it didn't matter. Not anymore. Power has a way of drying shame. Alexander sat off to the side. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. This wasn't his moment. It was hers. "For those of you wondering," Nina began, her voice calm but unflinching, "as of this morning, I've been appointed acting vice president of corporate ethics for Apex Marketing." A rustle of confusion, shock, maybe even fear. Someone dropped a pen. Someone coughed and tried to pretend it was normal. "This isn't revenge," Nina continued. "This is a restructure of values, of accountability, of culture." She pulled out a folder, a thick one. "Starting Monday, an independent ethics hotline will go live. Every report will go directly to an external law firm. No internal filtering, no quiet cover-ups." Her eyes swept the room. "If you've built your career on silence and fear, you should worry. But if you've done your job with respect and truth, you'll be just fine." Silence again, but this time it cracked, with a single clap, then another, and then more. Uneven at first, then real. Because truth, it echoes. Alexander stood, walked over, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You ready for this?" he asked quietly. Nina smiled, not soft, but strong. "I've been ready since day one," she said. "Now I just have the mic." Monday, 8:45 a.m. A new week, same old building, or so they thought. The hallways of Apex Marketing still buzzed with the click of expensive heels and the hiss of espresso machines. The air was thick with the scent of designer perfume, burnt coffee, and the quiet arrogance of people who believed Friday's chaos had somehow evaporated over the weekend. Suits rushed in with half-sipped Starbucks cups, nodding obligatory hellos and tossing fake smiles like they were part of the job description. Receptionist Betty, who usually greeted folks with a robotic good morning, now looked up with just a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. And then they saw it, right there at the front desk, hanging clean, bold, and undeniable like a warning sign on a factory gate. Nina Thompson Sterling, Vice President of Corporate Culture and Justice. Justice, not diversity, not inclusion, not some hollow HR buzzword that corporate brochures love to toss around. Justice. And that single word stitched on a silver nameplate rang louder than any bell that had ever echoed through Apex. It hit people different. To the ones who built their careers on whisper campaigns and sabotage, that badge felt like a blade. To the ones who had survived years of quiet humiliation and brushed off complaints, it felt like breath after drowning. And behind the reception area, something else sat waiting. The large conference room, normally used for budget reviews and marketing fluff, now held a projector already on and humming low. A thick binder rested next to it, labeled in bold block letters, "Disciplinary Documents, Active." Nobody had seen that before. Nobody knew who plugged it in, but every soul that walked past that glass door felt the temperature drop. It wasn't business as usual. It was reckoning. 9 a.m. The room filled up fast, faster than it ever had. The latecomers showed up early. The arrogant ones who used to scoff at internal meetings were seated in the front row. The ones who whispered about Nina behind her back, now they wouldn't dare meet her gaze. And Nina, she stood near the window, poised, not stiff, not pretending, present. She looked down at Manhattan like it was a chessboard. She had spent years being a pawn, Quiet, strategic, sacrificed. But today, she was the queen, and the board had flipped. She turned around. Her voice, when it came, didn't boom. It didn't need to. It landed with a kind of weight that commanded silence. "Good morning," Silence replied. "Today we won't be discussing quarterly performance," she said. "Today we're going to talk about culture, not the one we print in brochures, the one that actually exists behind closed doors, the one some of you helped create." Click. First slide appeared on the screen. A screenshot of a private Slack message. Jessica to Samantha. Subject, Nina. "Smart, sure, but too dark-skinned for our Texas client. Let's send Brad instead." Gasps. A few coughs. Some looked away. Others looked straight ahead like they hadn't just read what they read. Click. Next slide, security camera footage. The Coca-Cola moment. The can. The splash. The laughter. Brad's voice in the background. "Coca-Cola shower, diversity edition." And Jessica's mocking smirk. Nina turned off the video. "I could stop here," she said, quiet and surgical. "But this was just the foam. Let's look at what's beneath the surface." Slide after slide, audio clips, emails, HR dismissals, performance reviews that punished the outspoken and rewarded the cunning, jokes told behind closed doors that never reached the compliance desk, whispers about tone and fit, and attitude that somehow only applied to certain types of employees. The room was shrinking. People's throats were dry. Eyes darted toward exits that felt miles away. Nina stepped closer to the table. "I spent 6 months collecting this," she said, dropping a second thick folder next to the projector. "Not for vengeance, for clarity, for proof, to understand how deep the rot went." From the back of the room, someone stood up. "Are you saying you're firing people?" he asked, his voice coated with corporate concern. "You're going to cut loose half this office?" Nina turned her gaze to him. It was one of the senior account managers, the same man who'd once referred to her as loud in a meeting and then blamed his tone on being hangry. "I'm not firing anyone," she said. "I'm offering a choice." She held up a single sheet of paper. "In the next 7 days, every employee will undergo an external reassessment, implicit bias training, work culture review, third-party monitored. If you pass, you stay. If not, you leave. And yes, your reason for dismissal will be logged publicly." The man sat back down, slowly, pale. Nina continued, her tone razor-sharp. "We are also ending dark rooms. No more side chats about who fits and who doesn't. No more background whisper campaigns. No more laughing off racism as corporate banter. This office will no longer be a playground for mean spirits in power suits." Then Alexander stood up. Until now, he'd remained in the back, silent, watchful, a billionaire in a room full of people who forgot who signed their checks. He walked forward, placed a hand on Nina's shoulder, and spoke in the calm, cold tone of a man who had already signed off on every reform. "I support every word, fully. If anyone here thinks Apex should return to what it was before, I suggest you show yourself out now." Murmurs. Then applause. Soft at first, but real. One woman wiped tears from her eyes. Another stood, then sat, unsure whether to clap or cry. For some, the storm was survival. For others, it was justice finally walking in through the front door, in heels. 12:20 p.m. Nina's new office. The space still smelled like cedar and old money. The bookshelves were lined with business biographies written by men who had never hired a black woman unless it was for optics. Nina sat at the desk once ruled by a man who'd asked her to smile more during presentations. Now it was hers. She flipped through reports, pen tapping slowly, her face calm but focused. A knock. She looked up. There, standing in the doorway, was LaTanya, 60-something, housekeeping uniform, wrinkled hands, tired eyes. But today, those eyes glowed. "Excuse me, Mrs. Nina," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say thank you, for all of us, for not staying quiet." Nina's smile was different this time. Not for press, not for approval. It was warm, full. "LaTanya," she said, standing, walking toward her, "silence is a luxury we can't afford anymore. Not you, not me, not anyone." They stood there for a beat. 2 women, 2 generations. Both black, both invisible for far too long, but not anymore. Now they were writing the new rules. A week had passed. 7 days. For most folks, that might not sound like much. Barely enough time to catch up on emails, finish a report, or even notice the seasons shifting outside the office windows. But at Apex Marketing, 7 days felt like a reckoning wrapped in a thunderstorm. The air in the building had changed. You couldn't smell that usual high-dollar cologne or overpriced lunch delivery anymore. What lingered now was something raw, something real. Fear, but not the loud kind, where people panic or shout or scramble to cover their tracks. This was the quiet, suffocating kind. The type that pressed down on people's shoulders as they walked past Nina's office. The kind that made folks check over their shoulder before every comment, every text, every smirk. The loud mouths from before, the ones who made careers out of whispering insults and laughing at the quota hire, they weren't laughing now. They barely made eye contact. Chins once raised high were now tucked low, as if forgiveness could be found somewhere in the carpet fibers. But forgiveness? That wasn't on the schedule. Nina walked the hallway now with no bodyguards, no entourage, only respect trailing behind her. Not the plastic kind that's printed on HR posters. This was heavy, earned, undeniable. She no longer wore the stiff suits that once screamed, "I belong here." Now she wore what she pleased, bold colors, soft fabrics, outfits that didn't demand power because she was the power. She wrote the dress code now. She wrote the rules. The line in the sand, she drew it. On the 43rd floor, Alexander, the same billionaire most had only seen in Forbes articles, now sat in a chair that used to be hers, or rather, what used to be his chair, because this was Nina's building now. Her vision, her war, and everyone knew it. 10 a.m., company-wide briefing, a hybrid meeting, 400 people, in person and online. Every screen in the building buzzed to life. At the front of the room, the projector lit up. A new logo filled the wall. No more Apex's tired old slogan, by tradition, now, by truth, by equity. And then she stepped to the microphone. "Good morning," Nina said, her voice calm but cut like glass. "In the last 7 days, we've terminated 17 employees, launched 41 internal investigations, and implemented a real-time ethics monitoring system." She paused. "Let it sink in. You might ask why it had to be so harsh. You might say, they were just jokes. But let me be clear, not one of those jokes was funny. They were toxic, they were cruel, and they were dangerous." Slide after slide, anonymous messages of thanks from employees, confessions from those who had finally found the courage to speak up, black and white photos of long-silenced workers. Not heroes, just people who were tired of being stepped on and told to smile. "I'm not standing here alone," Nina said. "I am the voice of the many, the ones who were scared, the ones who were tired, the ones who kept their heads down because they thought no one would protect them." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Even the usual Zoom static fell quiet. "My mission isn't revenge," she continued. "It's balance. I don't want you to be afraid of me. I want you to be ashamed if you ever believed that someone's background made them less than you." The final slide landed. Her photo, that infamous still from the moment Coke was poured over her head, the humiliation, the laughter, and beside it, her current title, Vice President of Corporate Culture and Justice. Beneath the images, a simple caption, "They laughed, she rebuilt." After the briefing, back in her office, Nina returned to her desk. The air still held the aroma of fresh cedar, a reminder of the office's past life, when power wore a navy suit and called its prejudice just being traditional. Now it wore braids and conviction. A knock at the door. It was Lauren, a young black intern with nervous eyes and trembling fingers. She hesitated, gripping a notebook like it might shield her. "Miss Thompson," she whispered, "I just wanted to say, I never thought this place could feel safe, but today I walked in without fear. Thank you." Nina rose. She didn't say anything. She just stepped forward and wrapped Lauren in a hug. No corporate slogans, no rehearsed speeches, just warmth, just truth, because some moments don't need a microphone. 4 p.m. private boardroom. Alexander had called her in. Inside sat the executive board, gray-haired, silver-tongued men who'd spent their careers brushing off reform like lint on a lapel. They looked at her not with disdain, but with caution, maybe even curiosity, the same curiosity a man might have watching a thunderstorm form on the horizon. One of them leaned forward. "We appreciate what you've done," he began, "but you must understand, to some of us, it feels too abrupt. You came in with a sword, not a scalpel." Nina looked at him. No smile, just clarity. "The system wasn't sick," she said. "It was dead. I didn't come to heal it. I came to stop pretending it was alive." The boardroom fell still. Then Alexander spoke. "If you think we brought her here to stop the reform," he said, "you're mistaken. We brought her here to expand it. We want her mandate extended across the entire holding group." She didn't flinch. "Then I accept," Nina said, steady as a train on a track. "But I have one condition, which is, I bring a team, people who tell the truth, even when it's ugly, especially when it's ugly. They exchanged glances. Nods followed. The deal was made. 7 p.m. Home. The day was done. Nina sat on the balcony, the New York skyline glowing in the dusk. A glass of red wine rested in her hand. On her lap, the new ethics proposal draft. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. Alexander joined her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You changed everything," he said. "No," she replied. "I just showed them silence was no longer an option." He smiled. "You're not just a fighter. You're the new leadership." And that wasn't flattery. That was fact. Final note, this wasn't a story about power or wealth or revenge. It was a story about dignity, about a woman who stood in the ashes of humiliation, and instead of hiding, she built something. She didn't shout. She didn't burn bridges. She simply refused to be invisible. And in doing so, she reminded an entire industry and a whole generation, we're not a statistic. We're not your diversity hire. We are brilliance. We are truth. And we are done whispering.